Alright, so my first video is up and people are posting freely in the comments section. Let me say this straight out of the gate. I will be blocking and deleting comments from people who are simply profane and vulgar and insulting. If you want to contribute to an actual discussion or address something you see in the video, feel free to do so. If you're just here because you have a bone to pick, you're not welcome. That being said, in this video I'm going to address some of the comments that caught my attention in the comment section from my last video. I recommend you check the video out before you watch this one, otherwise you may not know what we're talking about. I will, however, reiterate my main point in my last video. My main point is this: if you have a painting, and you can see scrolling behind me a painting of mine, let's say that I created that painting for a purpose, and that purpose was to impress a girl. I'm just saying, maybe that was my intention. That could not be discovered using the scientific method if you only had the painting in your hands. Sure, you could measure the painting, you could do all kinds of experiments with the painting itself, but that will never yield the information that it was created to impress a girl, let alone a specific girl. That information is privy to you only if the creator reveals it to you. And that was essentially my point, that if we approach the world with the intention of only analyzing it scientifically, we should already know that science will never yield to the field of teleology, the study of purpose, of design, of intent. And so I cautioned people, naturalists and atheists out there on YouTube who, champion themselves as scientific and sort of look down on anyone who believes that the universe has certain qualities, such as purpose and design and a creator. Well, my caution is this, that science can't detect those things, not directly anyways, and therefore you shouldn't conclude based on your scientific findings that therefore there is no such thing as a purpose or creator for the universe. Because we can see in something as simple as a painting that science will not yield the idea that there is a purpose to it, or that even there's a creator. And that was sort of addressed more thoroughly in my last video. Anyways, let's go to the comments and see what people had to say. Alright, take a look at this comment, which I think puts a finger on an important issue. How do we know that you painted the painting? Well, why don't we take a vote right now? How many of you out there believe that I'm telling you the truth and that this is a painting that I did? Alright, now you've decided. Now how many of you are withholding judgment and are skeptical about its true author until you could actually get your hands on the painting itself and analyze it using the scientific method? I'm going to imagine that that would be a very small minority of you. And even less, I imagine there are going to be people who believe that I did not paint the painting at all. Now, what I'm attempting to illustrate with this point is that there are certain things that we can know without using the scientific method. In this case, identifying the author of a painting. The relevance of this, of course, is identifying the creator of the universe. Alright, this comment is very similar to the last one, but it's a little more refined. He says my argument is self-defeating because, for instance, you could have stolen that picture, oh my, from a friend and just imposed your own opinion on it. Unless we can be pretty sure you are the author, the purpose you describe might be false, we cannot tell. Until you can show that the Bible is actually inspired by the Creator, we have no reason to assume that it contains anything besides the human author's own opinions and ideas. That's the crux. And that's why we don't just accept that purpose. And I think that's a very fine argument. So what is the issue at hand here, and what was the purpose of me bringing up the painting? My point was that the scientific method is not going to be able to tell us who is the author in the event that there are competing authors. And there are. That's why there are competing religions. And that's also why you have this comment here asking, how do we know the Bible is the inspired Word of God? Indeed, how do we know that? And wouldn't it be worth finding out if it is or if it isn't? We already know that this isn't a scientific endeavor, and yet it's to the scientists we often look to find out, should we be looking to religion for an answer? Should we maybe be looking for a message from God? Because some of the scientists or atheists, naturalists here on YouTube would say no, of course not. Because science somehow has proven that there is no creator and that there is no purpose or design, when what I'm trying to caution you is that science could never have yielded that information in the first place, which is why they're coming to that conclusion. So, now, how do we know the Bible is the inspired Word of God? Well, I never endeavored to prove that the Bible was the inspired Word of God in my last video. That's something I'd like to do in a future video. But I think we're getting closer to the real issue. Here's another comment. This user says, interesting, I get what you're saying about science not being the all and end-all of knowledge, but how do we know the Bible is the Word of God? A similar sentiment to the last comment. How do you even know God cares? This has probably been said 1,000 times. How do you know the Bible is God's signature, if you will, on his painting? How do we know there isn't something within the painting that is or is not a signature? Maybe there is, and science could find it. Who knows? Well, I can't comment on what science has not yet found, because apparently, at least to the naturalists here on YouTube, apparently science has not yielded the existence of God, and has not yielded the design and purpose that the Christians are claiming there is. That, God created the universe so that we could know him. Now, there are, of course, Christians who claim, and I have claimed in the past, that science can draw us to God. I believe that we can look at the creation and say, well, this looks like evidence for a creator. But again, my point was that the creation itself does not contain the creator. So we cannot test God directly. We can perhaps test him indirectly by way of what he created. But that's not exactly my point, although that does seem to have something to do with the signature that we're talking about here. Intelligent design often talks about the DNA being God's signature in the creation, because DNA is information, and information is a type of communication, and communication requires an intelligence. But that's something we can talk about another time. The issue at hand, of course, is how do we know? And we're dealing with authorship and teleology, purpose. What was the intent of the author? We've recognized here, look, this guy's asking me unscientific questions. How do we know the Bible is the Word of God? That is not a scientific endeavor, again, although it's an important question to ask, isn't it? But should you go to a naturalist with that question? No, of course not, because their method of discovering truth using science alone could never yield the answers to these questions. So it's to the theologian that you should be looking, and be very skeptical of people who are naturalists who say, religion doesn't have any of the answers. Well, they're saying that only because they only believe in science. Let's take a look at this comment. I've heard this argument more times than I've cared to hear in my life. Science isn't meant to explain the subjective, it is meant to explain the objective. No, it will not tell you what a painter was thinking when painting a painting, but then again, it wasn't meant to. Science deals with facts, not opinions. The value of something is entirely based on opinion, therefore it's subjective, and science isn't meant to measure it. I do see a problem